Alright, so what is exactly a long exposure photograph? And also, what's a light painting photograph? Well, normally when we're taking regular old pictures, the shutter speed is usually it's a fractions of a second. So it usually never goes past a second. And now what the shutter speed is that little curtain inside your camera that flops up and opens up, and it lets all the light in, and then it stops and shuts, and then stops the picture from taking place. So normally, if I take a regular picture right now, that time that was really quick. It snapped and it was really quick. But let's take a 1 second exposure, and so you can see exactly what that sounds like. All right, ready? Okay. It opened up, it was taking all the light all into the camera there, and then it shut and stopped again. That's why you hear 2 clicks, one when it opens and the other one when it closes. Now that's what a long exposure is. It's basically pretty much anything above 1 second in length. Now what's a light painting photograph? A light painting photograph is where we have a light source, such as a flashlight or any sort of other type of light. I mean, there's hundreds of different lights that you can get. But the most primitive, basic, concrete tool is a flashlight. And a light painting photograph is basically, during the long exposure, we're going to be moving a light around the composition during that 1 second or longer exposure. Alright, so just as a quick example for a light painting photograph, I'm going to be taking a long exposure picture of that apple that you just saw. And right now we've got 13 seconds on our camera, so that's the exposure time. And the aperture is on f11. And the ISO is on ISO 100. So with all those settings all set up on our camera, and when we're in manual mode, of course, I'm just going to take this flashlight and I'm going to start illuminating the front of the apple. Okay, the picture is taking place right now. So I'm illuminating the front of the apple. Now I'm going to move behind the apple and shine the light into the camera and make a silhouette of the apple. Now you'll see in that picture that we have again, the light that was shining onto the apple from the front from this flashlight, and we also have the light trails that are behind the apple shining into the camera. So that kind of describes the two methods of light painting. We can either light our subject up normally, or we can shine the light into the camera like this and record the light trails that it makes. A lot of people call this method light drawing, and then the other method is mostly known as light painting, where you're shining the flashlight onto your subject. Alright, so we got that done. We basically know what a light painting photograph is now, but I just want to quickly go over the two fundamental lights that I like to use, and I also want to go over the camera settings so you know what camera settings to have on your camera when you're making light paintings. So first and foremost is the Maglite flashlight. This is a cheap flashlight that you can get at the store, and the reason why this light is in particular is so cool is because, first of all, you have this adjustable beam, so you can adjust it. You can adjust the beam either close up like that, or you can spread the beam out and widen it up to get a larger spread. So that's always nice to have. And as well as that, the cap can be taken off completely. And this is really cool because now we can move the light around objects, and you can capture the light strokes coming directly from the light bulb, but you can also capture the ambient lighting that it spreads onto the subject that's around the light source. So this is really cool. This is a highly recommended light by me. There's also some cool accessories you can get along with it. There is this fiber optic adapter that you can place on top of the cap, and now you get a really fine-tuned light source. So I can go in here and literally airbrush very accurate light onto this apple or any other subject that I'm light painting. Another cool thing that you can get for this Maglite is an IQ switch. Just go on Amazon and do a search for it. But basically, it allows you to have a button on the back, and you can adjust the brightness. So you can get dim, dimmer, you can make it flash. This is automatically flashing right now. And you can also make it flash twice as fast, just like that. And now the next one is a very simple LED lights. Now these, basically the big differences between these is the LEDs are usually cooler in color temperature. In other words, they're a little bit more blue. But the mag lights are a little bit more kind of warm and red a little bit. Now you can always adjust the white balance on your camera to compensate for this. So for example, if I wanted to make this cool LED light and I wanted to make it white, I didn't want any blue, I could readjust the white balance on my camera to say maybe shade or cloudy, and that would warm up the picture completely, and it would turn this blue light into it would add more red tones to it, and in turn it would neutralize the picture to make it perfectly white. Now if you really want an accurate white balance and you want to make sure that either one of these lights that you're using is dead on perfectly white, I would recommend taking a custom white balance picture. And you can use either a white piece of paper or you can use a gray card, either one. And I would just place it in front of the camera and then light paint the card with the light that you're going to be using. And then your camera would be color corrected for these lights that you're going to be using. Now LEDs and mag lights are very simple. There's also the larger mag lights that you can get, and these are the exact same thing. It's just that the bulb is a little bit bigger and the casing of course is pretty big. But you can still take the cap off of these ones as well. And then of course you can get regular flashlights. This is, it has several LEDs on it, so it's very bright. And you can't take the cap off of these. In other words, LEDs are more directional in nature. The mag lights, you can take the cap off and they're omnidirectional in a 360-degree sphere. These, they're directional. So if you wanted to make these somewhat omnidirectional, you could buy a white film canister and simply place that over the light with tape, and then you have a torch that's kind of omnidirectional. So you can light up your subjects just like that. And now what type of settings are you going to want to be using on your camera for light painting photographs? I would recommend always just going straight into manual mode on your camera. I usually don't recommend using any other mode for light painting because manual mode pretty much has it all and you're not going to be needing the other modes. So once you're in manual mode, I would recommend first setting the ISO to the lowest ISO possible. On my Nikon camera, it can go to ISO 200, but there's also a special option to kick it down to 100. So right now I usually always start off on ISO 100 on my camera. This will eliminate any sort of noise or grain, and it'll just make the image more high quality. Next, after you have ISO 100 dialed in, I'll then recommend setting the aperture to around f11. That's usually where I always start off on my particular lens, because f11 is the sharpest aperture on this particular lens that I'm using. I'm using the 18-55 lens that came with my Nikon camera. And then after that is the shutter speed. Now the shutter speed can be anything you want to. It depends on how long you're going to be light painting the photograph. Now usually for a long exposure photograph we're going to start off at 1 second, but we can keep on going on to 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Most cameras cap off at 30 seconds. So if you want to take a photograph that is longer than 30 seconds, you're going to need to get a cable release or a wireless remote for your camera. Now this always works a little bit differently from each camera you get, so you're going to want to check the instruction manual in your camera to make sure that it can even take a cable release or a wireless remote. And then there's a special option on most cameras as well that's called bulb mode. Again, you can just rotate the shutter speed dial until you go past 30 seconds, the next option right after 30 seconds should be a thing that says bulb. This is where it's a special feature where you can hold down the button on your camera, and if you hold it down for 1 second, it's going to take the picture for 1 second. If you hold down the button for 2.3 seconds, it's going to take the picture for 2.3 seconds. If you hold it down for an hour, it's going to take a picture for an hour. So you get the drift. The shutter speed is determined by how long you hold your finger on the button. So just like that. That's all bulb mode is. So that can be pretty useful. Usually those work great with cable releases, because with a cable release you can just hook it up to your camera and the button is on a little cable, and you just push the button in and then you can actually lock it in place, and then you can have the exposure go on for several minutes if you wanted to, and it's no problem. So that's usually the settings that I would recommend you starting out on. You can readjust them later on, but I would just recommend starting off at ISO 200 or lower and have the aperture set to f11. The higher the f number, the darker the picture is going to be. The lower the f number, the brighter it's going to be turning out. And then the shutter speed is totally determined by you and how long you think you're going to be light painting your photo. There is one more camera setting, and that would be the white balance. Now white balance, like I said before, these two different lights have different color temperatures. This one's a little bit more warm, this one's a little bit more cool. So if you want to adjust the white balance to make sure that these lights are coming out perfectly white, you can make a custom white balance picture for the light that you're using. And I would recommend checking your instruction manual if you don't know how to do that already, because the process is a little bit different for every camera that you use. One last setting that you must remember, the focusing. Usually when we're taking a picture, we always have autofocusing on because we're working in daylight situations and the camera can easily adjust the focus point right off the bat. But with light painting, it's a little bit different. You can focus two different ways with light painting. First way, of course, you can just take a flashlight, illuminate the subject that you're photographing, and when you're on autofocus, just push the button down halfway to autofocus, and then once it's all autofocused up, you would switch to manual focus and then start taking your pictures like normal. Now if you're photographing a landscape or something quite large where it can be difficult to illuminate the actual subject, what you can do is, say I wanted the focus point right here where my finger is. I would simply take a flashlight or a single LED, place it right where my finger was, leave it there, and then get my camera to autofocus on that specific point right there. Then just switch it to manual focus and take the light away and start taking your pictures like normal.